Welcome to On Earth as It Is in Heaven, brought to you each week with the support of the Eastern Orthodox Clergy Association of the Mahoning Valley and with the generous support of faithful listeners. It's our desire to expose orthodoxy to all who tune into this program and who speak of this experience to others. This is our effort at making small steps towards the salvation in the spiritual realm for all who listen. Here are your hosts for this week's edition of On Earth as It Is in Heaven.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Fr.Colin Barker. Today, I have a special guest, George, who decided to be like all the cool cats and get COVID, and he is sick. And so George is resting. He is doing just fine. We're praying for him. But I have a special guest. I have my choir director from St. Mark's joining us today, Emily Anzivino.
Hello.
And today we're going to talk about music and art in the Orthodox Church. In Orthodoxy, we have lots of different types of music, lots of different types of art. And we're going to kind of just go into that. But first, I want you guys to get to know Emily. Emily is extremely talented. She took over for music for me just this past year. George also, too, is part of the chanters and the choirs, and along with my wife and Vicky and a few others who help and have beautiful voices who lead the people worshiping and praising God. But Emily, what made you want to get into music and art, especially because she's also going to be training, God willing, to start drawing iconography too as well, which we'll get part of that as well with art. But what made you want to get into music and art?
So I was baptized into Orthodoxy when I was just a baby at a Carpatho-Rusin church, another jurisdiction, and I grew up with a completely different tradition and style of music, with very much four-part harmony, and where if everybody wasn't classically trained in music, it was really hard to get a prayerful and correct sound. So I tried. I had my godfather in the choir, and he now, since the prior choir director reposed, is taken over for the time being. So he got me into music in that sense. But I never really had a connection with that kind of music.
Okay.
It was really difficult because we had a church that had only a few youth, and many of the choir were people that just were getting tired of taking over for 50 years.
Yeah.
And so I did what I could, and I really enjoyed going to summer camp and learning how to chant there, because there was a mix of chanting. It was Carpatho-Rusin, it was very traditional Russian music, and then it was like Zenamini Chant, which is like a mix of both Byzantine sound and Russian sound.
Yeah. And now it's hard to explain what that all sounds like.
Yes.
And I would encourage those who are listening to actually look it up. So, for instance, Emily mentioned Carpatho-Rusin. That sounds like, for us, if you don't know, it sounds like Appalachian folk mountain chanting.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's beautiful in its own way. It really is. They all have their beauty. But for me, the first time I ever heard Carpatho-Russian music, I went to St. George, which has a miracle worker icon there in Pennsylvania, near Scranton, Pennsylvania. And I'll never forget that I walked in, and all of a sudden, everybody's singing, and it felt like I was in Appalachia, somewhere in North Carolina, you know, and I'm just waiting for the stomping of the feet to start happening. but it was really beautiful in its own way, and the Mother of God is there, and she's blessing them through their miracle working icon. But for those who don't know, I would really encourage you to look up a lot of this music that we're going to be talking about today, because it's going to be really hard to describe without audio samples.
Yes,
but,
absolutely.
But we're going to talk a little bit more too about why and what's the difference with them too. But sorry, go ahead, continue. I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's okay. So I did that up through ever since I could walk. So 2 years old, I was in the choir loft at my previous parish up until 17, 18 years old. When I was a senior in high school, that was I graduated right at the beginning of the pandemic, so that was kind of a difficult time in itself, but it came with a lot of hidden blessings that I wouldn't have been able to experience if COVID didn't happen. Due to my family's previous parish closing, my mom started coming to St. Mark Orthodox Church in Youngstown. And I've been familiar with this church. I mean, I've gone for nativity services almost my whole life on Christmas Eve, and we would go and do the midnight service. So I was familiar, but definitely it was still very new and a very hard shift for me. And about 3 months into coming for my mom, because at this time too, I was making the decision if Orthodoxy was for me or if I was going to continue to do it for my parents' sake. And it took 3 to 4 months of Father asking me if I'm going to chant because they need help, and me saying no, and Father saying, don't say no, just say not yet. And he was right, and it took me a few months, and on, I think it was Holy Friday, I started standing at the chanter's stand, and on Pascha, it will be the 1 year, I guess, anniversary of me starting my journey in learning Byzantine chant. And I've never felt more connected to the music in a church or the prayers in a church since learning this and praying this way.
That's really beautiful for you to share. I really appreciate that, Emily. A lot of people don't know, for instance, when we look at music and art, we kind of don't know how to even start. A lot of people, it's scary because you have to kind of step out of your zone and be creative. And people will think, well, how can I be creative and artistic? Well, or where does that even come from? How do I even get that from me? Well, if we look at our Lord, our God who loves us so much, we get that creativity from him. I mean, look at how he has fashioned the world and us made in his image, and his creativeness is so in depth, and it's so beautiful, right? This is why I always encourage people that when they go on walks, take out your headphones and actually listen to the birds singing.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be beauty in that, beauty in them singing, or beauty of the wind rustling through the leaves, or just the creation of just the beautiful sunsets or sunrises. And so we have such a great God who is an artist. I mean, in fact, there's prayers that we say that he is an artificer, right? He is a creator. He designs and paints. And this is the God that we worship and love. Now, when our creativity that we have of creating music and creating art should always be for the glorification of him and not for ourselves.
Absolutely.
Right? There's a lot of that. There's that temptation, and we're going to get into that, especially with music, because sometimes there'll be people or composers or chanters who will sing for the glorification of their performance.
Absolutely.
And I think I kind of want to get into, in Orthodoxy, where did this kind of start from? So, Orthodoxy, in all of church history, we have music and art. So this comes, especially from not only from creation and passing down through that, but it also comes from our Jewish tradition, our Jewish roots that we have. In the temple, it sounded very similar to how we chant in Byzantine style. Now, of course, it's not exactly how it's chanted in the temple because we can't replicate their voices. We're Americans, and music has changed throughout the years, so it would slightly sound like that. I don't want to go into too much detail with that because I don't know what they sounded like exactly in the temple. Right? That'd be very arrogant of me to say, well, this is what they sounded like. But we get a lot of our chanting style from the way that they chanted in the temple. Right, and we know in the temple history that they had such things as 2 different choirs, left and right, and they would antiphonally chant. This was very common in the Jewish temple practices. And then as the temple grew and then became Christians, grew or fulfilled, the fulfillment of Christianity came in, a lot of that chanting style was taken. So, for instance, we have what's called antiphonal psalm chanting. So we see that in the Divine Liturgy. We call them as antiphons, and you hear chanters sing a psalm, and then they'll sing the refrain that goes with it.
Yes,
so,
yeah.
For instance, most Sundays it comes from Psalms 91 and 92, where they're chanting that first couple verses through the intercessions of the Theotokos, or Save us, O Son of God, which comes in as the refrain. And so there's a lot of that beautiful transition that came into the Orthodox Church And then it grew into different traditions too because of culture. Culture definitely affects how music and art is depicted into the church, but as long as it's according to tradition, which we're about to get into.
Yes.
So as Byzantine chant and art iconography grew in the church, there was a continuation of this in the temple. And then it kind of grew more. So for instance, Byzantine chant in the Middle East is going to sound different in Byzantine chant with Romanians or Serbians.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, and we've heard that before. Like, for instance, for us on Nativity, on Christmas night, we sing what's called the Serbian chant. And it sounds very similar to Byzantine chant, but it has its own rhythm and it has its own kind of different flavor, if you want to say, within music.
Mm-hmm. It does. It does. It's still so incredibly beautiful as well. And I think what's really beautiful about Orthodoxy in general is that there are so many traditions that you can grow up with and so many traditions that you can learn, and it's still all Orthodoxy. It's not, there's not like different jurisdictions over another. We're all coming from different points in history that Orthodoxy was brought to those areas. I mean, I grew up in a Russian tradition where those traditions were formed years after the Greek traditions and the Antiochian traditions, just because Orthodoxy was brought to them years later. And that's also the music in Russian tradition as well. It was composed a lot later, so it does not sound really anything like how it would have been chanted in the temple. But it's still all Orthodoxy, and I think that's so beautiful, because me growing up for 18 years in a completely different tradition of Orthodoxy, I didn't feel like I needed to relearn everything when I switched parishes, when I started attending St. Mark, because it's all Orthodoxy. You just need to learn what their special ways of celebrating Orthodoxy and their traditions are.
Yeah, it's really true, you know, and as Orthodoxy spread, so for instance, you know, we're talking about Byzantine chant here, but we're about to get into four-part harmony. You know, when Orthodoxy spread into the Slavic lands, you know, Serbia, Ukraine, and Russia, they had similar music. It's called Zenamini Chant. Emily mentioned it before. Zenamini Chant is one of my favorite styles of chanting in Orthodoxy. I love Byzantine, and I also love Zenamini. Zenamini is its own way it's its own different type of chanting. Sounds very similar in a lot of regards. It's written very similar to Byzantine chant because there's things called neumes, which is its own type of reading music. And for those that know music, you know that there's different types of ways of writing music. We don't have just the standard staff Western notation, which is easy for us as Americans to read. But when we look at things called neumes, which is the Eastern style of looking at music and writing music, you're going to go, what is all of this?
It looks like a different language.
It does. But once you start learning it, it's actually really not as complicated as it looks. It's just scary because you see all these lines and these upside down R's, and you're kind of like, how am I supposed to move? You know, how am I supposed to go up and down? But, you know, in Russian music, Zenamini, they had that. And it really wasn't until about the 1700s, the 18th century, maybe even a little bit earlier, they started converting to what's called Western four-part harmony. Now, I'm not going to bash too much on it. I'm just kidding. There's a lot of beauty in Western. There's a lot of beauty in four-part harmony. There really is. I see a lot of dangers in both sides when it becomes about self and not about for the glorification of God.
Yes, absolutely.
Because there's this thing in Byzantine where they'll chant one letter for 15 minutes. That can happen for a performance. But there's also in four-part harmony where there's this idea of we need to be loud, and it needs to be about the music and not about what we're saying, not what we're singing. In Orthodoxy, the music is always second to the words. So what I mean by that is that what the chanters do. So for instance, for those who don't know, what chanters do is that they have an incredibly important ministry in the church, because it's not only is it for the glorification of God, but it's also for evangelization, and it's also to lead others into praise God. So for instance, if you're not praying God, you're going to do a terrible job in evangelizing, and you're going to do a terrible job in leading people in prayer. And so the words must always come first. So for instance, what the chanters are singing is our theology in our church. And we have to take that serious, because that's what our faith is about. Our faith is not about how you chant and how you sing. Both are really beautiful, and it is shows how we are artistic. But we have to be really, really careful about making sure that our singing is not about a performance.
Yes, I think there's a fine line as well, because you want to sound beautiful and prayerful, so it's not a distraction for others. Yeah. But really, the second that turns into, well, I need to sound beautiful and prayerful so people compliment me, it can happen, and you might not even realize it. And you have to kind of take a step back and be like, I'm not doing this for myself. This is all for the glorification of Him, God. And it really, once you have that mindset, it makes you wish there were more people to hear the words that are being chanted, or even being read. I mean, during Matins Orthros, we read the same 6 Psalms every single Matin service, and they are so incredibly beautiful that you can read them anywhere. But when you're reading them in the church at 8:45 in the morning with all the lights off, it's a different
different feeling.
And it's so beautiful, and you just want everybody to be able to experience that feeling, because you do care a lot about your church family. I do. Even if I don't know them well, you still, if you experience these things, you just want to bring everybody with you, just as like if you're going to Disneyland and you know how much fun it is, and you want to bring like your friends to Disneyland. It's what it feels like. It's that genuinely that same feeling. Yeah. It's just really beautiful.
I think there's a lost art. If I can use that, a lost art of making sure that our music is prayerful, but yet beautiful in the sense that it's not a performance. It's worship to God. There's kind of that distinction that's been kind of gone, because we live in American Idol world now, where everybody has to. That was a good one. Yeah. Where everybody has to show off, and it's not about that at all. Like what Emily just talked about, the 6 Psalms. For those who don't know, these 6 Psalms are the same Psalms. So Psalms 3, 37, 62, 88, 102, and 142. And that comes from the temple worship too as well, and morning worship. That's exactly where it comes from. And those psalms are also in our Orthodox tradition, we believe that those psalms will be the psalms that are read continuously while we are being judged on Judgment Day. And those psalms are filled with standing before God. The enemies are surrounding me, and so on and so forth. And many people kind of miss out on that. Even as Orthodox Christians, we miss out on that beauty of kind of standing in kind of dim light, reading these solemn psalms, and kind of going, all right, what is important in my life? It's right here, standing before God, hearing these psalms, hearing the beauty of the prayers of these psalms and the chanting. And so I think there's kind of lost to that. Psalmody is really huge in Orthodoxy. It makes up almost majority of our hymnography. Yes. It comes from Psalms. And the chanting of Psalms, obviously we know that comes from temple worship. So, the worship that we're seeing is the continuation and the fulfillment of what Christ, why he came, the fulfillment of everything, of all the prophets, of all the Old Testament, everything. He fulfilled all of that, including worship. And worship is fulfilled. And so why would we disregard the Psalms? Sometimes
they can be, especially, I mean, I in my old previous parish, I never went to Matins. My family was really wonderful about when my little brother and I were little, up through our teenage years. They would always make sure to take us to every liturgy, every weekly service, and every Vesper service. And you do hear these things, but when I started attending Matins regularly, especially at first, those words were intense when you really started to listen to them. Yeah. But when you really grasp the beauty of it, it makes even the Divine Liturgy so much more, not more beautiful. It really is. It is the most beautiful that it could ever be, the service. But when you have that foundation just that morning, even, it gives you a different mindset and a different heart to go into divine liturgy.
Yeah. And many people miss out on that because, well, I think there's a lot of reasons why, but I think for one, I think people are scared to obtain holiness, and you can find holiness through the music and art of our Orthodox Church. I mean, this is why we have saints. We have saints that are composers. We have saints that are iconographers, artists. I mean, you have to be detailed and you have to be disciplined. And so many people kind of miss that point that there's holiness for all of us. We're all called to attain holiness. But there's this kind of fear that, I don't know, maybe I can't do this, so I'll just show up halfway between Father's homily, and and there's that scaredness of, can I actually do this? Well, yeah, you can. You can obtain holiness. All of us are, but it comes through finding what God has given you, your creative talents, and that's a lot. That's very broad. That's a big umbrella. I mean, we're only talking about a small portion of the creative side of man through music and art. And I think many people kind of skip out on that's exactly what it's there for, to glorify God. Well, what is glorifying God? Praising Him and attaining holiness.
Yeah. I really agree. And I think that, I don't know if there are any misconceptions about if there's like a limited list of things you can do to serve the church, but there are so many different talents and just things that you can do to offer to the church. I mean, obviously chanting and helping with the services, serving in the altar is something that everybody sees all the time, but people don't see the vacuum or the floors being vacuumed, and people don't see the candles being restocked. And it's just, when you are coming, like Father said halfway through the homily, you don't really think about those things. And those are all things you can help with. It's not limited to writing icons on the walls and chanting for 30 hours a week and going to church every day. You can serve as long as you are serving God in an honest way and with your whole heart, and not for the glorification of self, but for the glorification of Him. It doesn't matter how much you do, as long as you're doing as much as you can. I feel. I mean. Yeah,
I think that's absolutely true. I mean, all of that is creativity in a lot of ways, right? Because cleanliness, like you mentioned vacuuming, right? Cleanliness is next to godliness. As the saying goes. I mean, could you imagine if we just had a messy, disgusting looking church? I mean, people would immediately think, obviously you don't care about this, and you don't care about God, right? Or just serving Him in different sort of ways, pulling weeds.
Yes.
The beauty of the church, right? And there's a lot of that I think many people miss out on because we aren't thankful. And when we change our mindset of being thankful, it's amazing how fast we get things done. So for instance, pulling weeds. I mean, nobody wants to bend over on their back in the middle of the summer and sweat like crazy and pull weeds that don't want to come up, right? That's painful work, but you know what though? It's work that makes the church look beautiful. So that way people can come and see, oh my goodness, who are these people? This place is not beautiful. It's like, I always use the description of being a conduit. But I think I kind of want to further that. We're called to be conduits, right? It's like when you drive in Youngstown area, and for those who know, we have like one of the worst roads, and potholes everywhere, right? We need to be smooth roads. We need to be smooth roads that everybody wants to drive on. That's what I mean by being a conduit, right? A conduit of God's grace and holiness, to where He's driving on us and He is passing on us and spreading His grace and love to everyone. But if we're roads that are full of potholes and full of roadblocks, our Lord's not going to want to pass His holy grace through us, right? Yeah. And that's what serving the Lord is. It's filling those potholes. It's removing the roadblocks through a life of of serving him, a life of confession, a life of communion with him, a life of being creative in your own way that God has given you to glorify him, so you can be a smooth road and not a road full of potholes and roadblocks.
Yes, and about communion and confession, when you start to go regularly, your heart needs it. You feel heavy if you hold off for a while, and there's times where I've had to go to confession twice in 1 month because I've had a rough month. There's like rough periods of time, but when you start going, you really do feel a weight lifted off of you, and you do feel so much closer to God. And I know, especially towards the beginning of the pandemic, it was really tough for a lot of people. There was a lot of fear and a lot of, and no one really knew what was going on. There was a lot of distress everywhere. And I wasn't going to confession and communion for about a year. And the first time that I went, I was dreading it. And then I sat there for an hour and cried about my last year. And after confession, I had such a different mindset. And I don't know how else to explain it unless
you come and see.
You come and see, and you go and you have those feelings. And if you're not Orthodox, you can experience these things still. I mean, not to the full extent, but you can still come and be a part of the Divine Liturgy. You can still see these things, and you can still see the beauty,
and still
then
become Orthodox.
Still become Orthodox, and then you can be a part of these sacraments, which they are. It's not just like a therapy session. It's a sacrament. There's prayers, and it's really a special thing that I can't stress enough how important it is on a personal level. It would make a difference in my life if I wasn't able to partake in these sacraments.
Well, and through those participation in those sacraments, you become creative more. Mm-hmm. You become more like Christ, right? This is exactly what we're called to be like. It's interesting that you started talking about that through repentance and prayer, because that's exactly what an artist needs to do, especially a musician or an artist in the church, right? An iconographer or a musician in the church just can't come and say, all right, I'm here. I'm ready to just throw some paint on the wall. So, it's like, no, this is not how this works. Mm-hmm. First of all, in iconography, we venerate it and we love the icons because the icons draw us closer to the church and closer to Christ. And it's the same with the music too, as well. Mm-hmm. I think for many, growing in art, growing in the music that we're kind of focusing on, it has to start with that, like we've been talking about. It really has to start with serving God, and it has to start with in that mode and that mentality, and then from there you'll grow.
Yes. From
there you'll grow.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to get back to our music real quick. In Antiochian Church, Antiochian Orthodox Church, where again there's many variations of Orthodox, and all have their beautiful history. But in Antioch, at St. Mark's, we do Byzantine chanting, and Byzantine chanting is really beautiful. They're all beautiful. All forms of Orthodox chanting are really beautiful. But when I came in, I grew up as a Protestant, and I left Protestantism because there was this lack of art, and there's lack of love and appreciation for music. Mm-hmm. So what I mean by that is that a lot of hymns that we sang, although they were very catchy and it's the same rhythm over and over again, but just with different words, it became really kind of boring. Mm-hmm. And then it just finally became, for most Protestants, it either became a rock band, so then it becomes a performance, or it becomes a very loud organ that you can't even hear yourself singing. Yes. And that was really hard for me, and really painful, because I would sometimes think when I was a Protestant, I'd be sitting in the pews going, how is this glorification of God? Mm-hmm. And then a lot of the times we'd be missing an organist, so sometimes we have to cancel services because nobody know how to sing a cappella, and in Orthodoxy, we don't use musical instruments at all. It's all through the voice, because that's what the sacred harp is. The sacred harp is the mouth.
That's the instrument that God gave us to use, is our voices.
Now, that doesn't mean that we despise instruments. I play the banjo at home, but that's at home.
Yes, yeah.
That's at home. And my little one tries to play the mandolin, and it's just her strumming it really loud and really hard, singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, right? But there's a difference between having that type of music that's based around our culture and society at home versus coming in and having it done prayerfully and in love and service to God and worship. There's a difference in that. And I lost a lot of that when I was a Protestant. I lost a lot of music, a lot of art, became really watered down. Even the services themselves changed immediately. Those who maybe grew up Lutheran, you know exactly what I'm talking about, where it used to be very high church and very beautiful. And then next thing you know, you're singing Jesus Loves Me. And services is 20 minutes long, and that's it. Mm-hmm. And that could be that can really affect you. There was a priest that I knew. He grew up Nazarene, and those who know Nazarene, back in the 1960s and 70s, they started a movement. A lot of Protestants did this. They started a movement where they would have their high church Protestant services, but then all the kids would go to Sunday school. And the kids would have maybe a 10, 20-minute Sunday school lesson and some happy, clappy songs. But as those kids got older, they went, well, hey, I want my form of worship. Mm-hmm. And so all that form of, that was in Protestantism, that was in Roman Catholicism, that had a lot of beauty and music and art, quickly changed into Jesus Loves Me, mm-hmm. This I Know, right? Mm-hmm. All those kind of watered down songs. And so that, like I said, that doesn't bring spiritual nourishment. For me, it didn't. For me, I kind of, that brought a lot of pain because mm-hmm. it kind of thought, you know, how can I worship God in this? Where is he in this? And then it wasn't until I stepped into Orthodoxy. When I stepped into Orthodoxy, I came into a little small Russian Orthodox church that had a beautiful choir that did a variation of music, Russian and Byzantine music, Serbian, Romanian. And it was very beautiful and well diverse, and they did a really good job at doing that. But I've also been to a lot of Orthodox churches where I've seen both sides of the spectrum, where it's really beautiful, and then I've seen the other side of it where it's, oh my goodness, it's cats screeching on the wall. Can somebody stop them? You know?
Yeah.
You know, I'll never forget I went to one of our godsons, my wife and I, we went to one of our godsons' parish. It was his baptism. We were going there. We got there really early. We went to Matins in the morning. And Matins was this beautiful singing, beautiful chanting. It was incredible. And then all of a sudden, once Divine Liturgy started, you hear this extremely loud and out of tune organ and screeching singers. And I looked at my wife and said, what happened? We just went from heaven to hell.
Was it an Orthodox church?
Yeah.
Wow.
So even in Orthodoxy, we struggle with this balance. And those who know me, I always focus on the balance because that's what Christ tells us to do, to stay on the narrow path. And the narrow path is balance of this perfection where it is beautiful, but at the same time, most importantly, it's prayerful.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. I completely agree. And like I said earlier, it is a fine line if you are, like for me, I was just coming into this, and I am in the process of learning Byzantine chant as well. I mean, last night I started learning all of the Lenten services, and of course I went my whole life to those services, and I learned them in the Russian tradition and with the Russian music, but this is my first Lenten season as a chanter and learning these things. And it's difficult when you're learning because you want to learn it correctly and you want to chant it correctly, but you have to be in the mindset of this is for God, and if I mess up a note, no one is going to notice. This is not for myself. This is all for God. And I was struggling with that for a while, and I would overthink about the way that I was chanting, and I would apologize a lot of the time for the way that I was chanting because it wasn't exactly how it was written on the paper. And now I am, and it takes time, just as everything, little by little, it takes time to really fully believe with your whole heart that it's for the glorification of God. And the way that you are chanting, if it is prayerful and in prayer and it's not a performance, it will be exactly how God needs it to be.
Yes. And those who don't know, I mean, our Orthodox services are rich with music. I mean, the majority of it is singing. And especially for Lent, for those who don't know, Orthodoxy, we don't just say, well, let's, it's not a 30-day period. It's very long. It's almost 60 days long. With church almost every single day. Once we get to what's called Holy Week, we have church twice a day, 3 times a day for some of them.
For about 8 days.
Yeah. And it's long, but it's because it's our walk with Christ to Golgotha, to Calvary. And we take that seriously. And so if we look at the worship and we said, you know what, here's Lent. I'm just going to throw it down. I'm just going to throw all this down the road. I'm just going to do whatever I want.
Yeah.
Well, we don't have that. We have obedience to what's a thing called tradition. There's a reason why we chant the way that we do and we sing the hymns, certain hymns. I mean, there has to be, we can't just make up our own hymnography. That's, well, then you might be saying, well, Father, how is that being creative? Well, it's being creative because you're being obedient to what has been handed down to you.
Yes.
And in our age now of complete destruction of tradition, destruction of tradition is not being creative at all. So for instance, in Lent, we have services all the time. We have we serve on Wednesday night what's called Pre-Sanctified Liturgy, which is its own liturgy, and it has its own hymns, and it has its own way of even chanting. I mean, normal divine liturgies that we sing are very bright and beautiful, but Pre-Sanctified liturgies are very solemn and very slow, and there is a lot of hidden mystery just in the Pre-Sanctified liturgies. And so I think with that, there's this idea that I can't separate, a lot of Orthodox kind of struggle with this. I need to have my set music so that way I stay in my box. But in Orthodoxy, you can't stay in a box. Music can't fit in a box. It won't work. It will never work. It's like what we always practice on. We can learn the music as best as we can, but sometimes there's also different composers for each hymn even in Byzantine music.
Yes.
And so that's why we can never put music in a box. And also, too, all of us can't fit in a box. We have our own artistic ability. And so that doesn't mean that we're being disobedient to tradition. It means that we have to understand, again, that there's a balance to where we're obedient to tradition being set to the hymn that we're singing. But sometimes there's different ways of singing it.
Yeah. When it comes
I hope that makes sense.
Yes, I think it makes sense. I mean, I don't know if many people realize this, every single weekend I get to church for Vespers about an hour early, and I look through probably 40 to 50 printed out pieces of paper for Vespers, Orthros, and then liturgy. And those are all the variables. Those are all pieces and hymns that change.
Yeah. Yeah, the hymns change each day.
They change daily, and a lot of times you'll sing them once a year, and then you wait until the next year for it to come back around, and then you sing it again. You really can't stay in a box when it comes to...
Well, it's very dynamic, and it's constantly changing. There are certain things that stay, like for instance, in liturgy, for the most part, 75% of it never, well, I'd say 80% of it never changes.
Yes.
80% of it never changes. But then sometimes there's a festal time period. So for instance, we have just gotten out of Nativity and Theophany and Epiphany. And just in those 2 feast days, those festal time periods, because there's time periods too as well. We have the 12 days of Christmas, and then we have a week of Theophany celebrating. So there's all this celebration and all the music with those feasts. And then on top of that, in those days of those feasts, it changes.
Yes.
So it's incredibly well in depth. It changes and it's versatile, but it's the same hymns year after year, even though the time may change of the day. So I hope that makes sense. We're coming into Lent soon for us, which I can't believe. Within about a month, we'll be starting what's called the Lenten Triodium.
It's gone very quick.
Yeah, gone very quick. And even in Lent, every single day it changes. Then once we get to Easter, to Pascha, all the music changes again. And then Pentecost and so on and so forth. Music is just constantly changing. And so that's also the beauty and the creativity, and that you can never get bored with the music in Orthodoxy because it's constantly moving.
It's always moving, and there's so much to learn.
Yeah.
There's so much to learn. It is, thousands of years of when it comes to Byzantine chant, thousands of years of music and traditions that you won't be able to learn in a year, in 5 years. You're just continually learning, because each year that goes by, like I said earlier, you sing one thing maybe once, and then you have to wait another year to sing it again. And there are special melodies, and there's 8 tones, and along with those 8 tones, there are many, many, many special melodies and special hymns in each of those tones, and you just have to.
And that's the beauty, and that's the beauty of the history of it too. Is that when you look at it, all of our hymnography, right, our hymns, prayers that we sing. For those who don't know, prayers that we sing, these are written by pious men and women who are saints. That's one thing I struggled with in Protestantism. That many of our hymns were written by Renaissance composers. And when you start studying Renaissance and medieval time periods, a lot of those men actually weren't the classiest guys, and I probably would never invite them over for dinner. And I mean that not jokingly, but also at the same time seriously. It's not a bash to them. And there's sense that to those who worship in Protestantism and Roman Catholicism, I'm just trying to reach out to you so that you can understand kind of the history and the music of the West, that they transitioned a lot of this and became very culturally where it would like be using pop music for our worship. And that's what it became in the Renaissance and medieval time period, that they used their cultural music and their composers to write music in the church so that they could feel good. And there's a lot of problem to that. There's an issue with that, because there's a difference in Orthodoxy where we set aside the worldly and the heavenly, right? The earthly and the heavenly. And where we're taking the earthly and we're trying to transcend to the heavenly. And that may hurt a lot of those who are listening to your feelings, and I ask for your forgiveness, but you have to understand that worship is not for the glorification of our culture or the glorification of some artist or some composer. It's for the glorification of God and everything we do. And I would also ask people, actually read your music and your prayers that you're saying, and does it make sense to you? Or does it cause you to think, oh, well, do I actually believe in that? I even said that to even my own Orthodox people. I tell my people, I said, do you really truly believe in this? Because I just want to make sure, because this is what these are the questions on the quiz at the end.
Yes.
And if you don't believe in God, or if you don't believe what you're saying, then you really need to do an in-depth search and understand why we have the hymns that we have. And sometimes the hymns, maybe you may not understand right away, but just like all theology, just like all prayers, it takes time to grow in. It takes time for you to understand, okay, what am I saying? Do I truly believe in this? And am I willing to go in depth further into this as well? And so I caution, and I tell people, do you truly believe what you're saying? And all the Protestants and Roman Catholics and even in Orthodox, because you have to make sure your heart believes what you're saying.
Yeah.
And so in our beautiful Orthodox music that we have, I love it. I am a huge component of beauty, because beauty and prayer. Because if it's not beautiful and it's not prayerful, then you're not doing service to God, and you're not doing a service to those who are coming into the church, whether it's their first time visiting or it's their 1,000th time visiting and coming in there. And so I've heard those choirs that are really bad, and I never want to step foot back in those churches ever again.
It needs to be a welcoming environment. It really does,
That's
because it makes a difference anywhere you walk into. I mean, music is such a universal language. Someone doesn't even need to speak that language to understand. I mean, Father, you've been to Mount Athos, and you're learning Greek now, but you didn't really know it then. And those services were still absolutely beautiful.
Yeah,
and
they affect your heart. I mean, you feel it.
You feel it in your soul. And music is such a universal language that it needs to be done prayerfully. And that is difficult. I mean, it takes practice, and it takes effort outside of coming to church at 10 a.m. to start singing. At the chanter stand. You need to spend time at home and look over this stuff ahead of time, or come to church an hour ahead of time, and really prepare yourself through prayer, but also through practice, because both are very important.
Yeah. Because if you're not doing either, then they're both you're gonna fail. Yes. And I think, you talked about how basically how this music, how you're practicing for it, and how music is universal. I really love that. It's kind of what I'm trying to say, but you said it more beautifully. I think that absolutely music transcends and universal. It's like when we hear our music now in our culture that we're living in now, right? So let's take that. Turn on the radio, and everything you're going to hear sounds robotic voices. So it's not even a real person's voice most of the time.
Yeah.
I don't want to say all the time because I don't know. I'm not in those studios, but it sounds robotic, right? It sounds that it's changed. The other thing too that I would add is that most of the music actually doesn't make sense. It's just a nice beat, a nice rhythm that's just repeated with some stupid phrase.
Yep.
And a lot of times it sounds like it's brainwashing phrases.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely agree.
Especially when you look at pop and you look at rap. Country music does it too, where it's just the same sentence repeated 1,000 times with the same rhythm and beat, right? So you look at the rhythm and beat, you look at the music, the actual words that are being said, and then most of the times it's either going to degrade men and women. It's definitely going to blaspheme. A lot of times it blasphemes God. And calling him names. I mean, this is something that I encourage people that as soon as you hear that, I encourage my people to shut off that music and don't listen to it ever again, because it's not doing you any good.
It's really destructive to your soul.
Yeah.
And it stays with you.
And part of that too, right? So you said universal, which is really true. It's universal because our senses, right? Our sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, all of that is for the glorification of God. So for instance, if you're using your mouth and your ears to sing music, that is really detrimental to you and your soul, do you think you're ever going to grow spiritually? But if you listen and you sing music that is for the glorification of God, don't you think that's going to change you?
Yeah.
Right? So I think that for most of our music that's on radio now, as I'm on the radio, that's on the radio now, is something that is that we as Christians, and for anybody who's not, maybe you're not a Christian and you're picking up on this cultural society that we're living in, that maybe you see really how brainwashing it's becoming, how detrimental it's being, how just immoral it is. But in Orthodoxy, we have the beauty and the prayer where it's transcending our earthly voices to mix with the heavenly voices with the angels. And that's why the music is constantly changing all the time, because the angels are flying constantly around God.
And the Orthodox Church, when you are a part of a service, when you're able to, it is being a part of it. It's not just listening to a service, because it does engage your 5 senses. All of your senses are being engaged while you're in an Orthodox church. And that's why it's so important to be present. I mean, being present with your physical body, yes, but your mind needs to be there too. Yeah, so fully grasp what's going on, because there's so much happening, and if your mind isn't there, there's so much you're missing out on.
Yeah, and that's really true. I would say too that if your mind is not present, you'll never transcend the earthly to the heavenly. You'll never transcend to heaven. And I think for many people that's a struggle, because we have so many cares and problems in our life, busyness, whatever it may be. We sometimes forget to leave that at the door. And when we don't participate, I tell my people all the time, participate, sing with the chanters. That doesn't mean you sing over them, and doesn't mean you take over. It means you follow with them. They lead with them. You lead with the chanters in the singing. Because if you're not singing, because congregational singing with chanters has always been part of temple worship.
Yes.
And then it grew into the early church, and then it grew into the church now. We are the early church, but as the church was growing more and more throughout history, the people singing with the chanters and the choir has always been a part of the history of worship, worshiping God. And so if we're forgetting about that, of course, our mind is going to wander. Our mind is going to go, man, I need to go grocery shopping after this. Oh, I forgot to get mustard. Oh, I got this bill I need to pay. Oh, I forgot to do this at work on Friday.
Yes,
Your mind just goes every single place. Oh, got mad at my spouse. Oh my goodness, I asked for forgiveness. I'm going to take communion now. And so on and so forth. Like your mind is just going everywhere instead of just taking a deep breath and singing. Even it just means singing quietly.
Yeah, I think it's really important, and especially, like Father said, it's 80% of the liturgy really doesn't change. The antiphons are typically the same. Maybe the verses are a little bit different here and there, but
until you get like the different refrains, for like Nativity, save us who was born in the cave, and you're going, all right,
who was baptized by John in the Jordan. Yeah. So it really stays, the majority of it stays the same. And you're allowed to sing. I want you to sing with me. I want you to sing with me. And also, if you would like to learn, talk to me. I can help you. I am learning as well, and we can learn together. I think it's so important that people truly understand that it's not just my job to sing and chant. It's everybody that's there. Even if you don't think you have the most beautiful voice, you still have a voice to sing and praise God. And it's important to use it.
Yeah.
Especially in the liturgy, because the liturgy is
that unison voice, right? That one voice raising up to God, and sometimes we forget that. That's one of my struggles that I've always had with four-part harmony, four-part music, and all of music. Just four-part has always been a struggle for me because it's not just one voice; it's four voices, and that sometimes can create distractions for me. That's why I really love Zenamini. That's why I really love Byzantine. That's why I love unison chanting, because it's one voice that is glorifying God. And sometimes for me, I think we forget that we can all chant that way. Because you have an ear for a reason to hear, and you have a mouth to sing for a reason, right? To glorify God. And so I tell them all the time, chant like the angels, even though you may not sound like an angel. So it's okay that you may not chant like an angel, but to God, you sound like an angel.
Yes, absolutely.
And so we need to kind of get over that pride and have some humility and start singing and to glorify God, because it's not about you. It's not about your cares and your worries at the time. And that may offend you. We would say, well, Father, I'm coming to be relieved of my worries. Yes, you are. But in order to be relieved of your worries and your cares, you have to keep your focus on God.
Yes. And using your voice, but also using your body, like by blessing yourself and by doing prostrations, it brings your mind, I guess, back down to you. It's not floating in the air. You're not thinking about a million things. It's not running at 1,000 miles an hour. When you're using your body to bless yourself, make prostrations, sing, all of those things combined really help with the distraction. If you struggle with being distracted, those things help so much. They really do.
But we have to make sure that it's, a lot of times when we do it out of, for instance, I've heard people call prostrations holy burpees. When we look at it like as a workout, of course you're not going to feel the grace of God.
Yeah.
Or if you're going to say 1,001 prayers, but you're doing it because, so you can tell everybody that you did 1,001 prayers instead of doing 1,001.
Thank you for clarifying. That is a very good point.
Instead of doing 1,001 prayers, because you need those 1,001 prayers to help you prepare for the divine liturgy, to prepare you for matins. And I would say too that those who usually struggle with their attention in divine liturgy, it's because usually they haven't prepared themselves. So it's just like when we're running a marathon or getting ready for a big race. In order to prepare for that, you have to work out. And that's what Vespers and Matins is that they're the workouts before the divine liturgy, before the race. Because the divine liturgy, there's a lot of tension and there's a lot of struggle in the divine liturgy. And there's a huge battle because the devil doesn't want us to celebrate what's happening in the divine liturgy. It's the mystical sacrifice that is happening. And so, but with that, we need the chanters. I appreciate Emily and George and Vicky and my wife, who do incredible job singing. I'm always looking for more singers, especially to come up who are dedicated, first and foremost dedicated to being obedient to the church tradition, but also realizing that they have their voice that can't be stuck in a box, but also being in unison. So again, there's this balance. There's this balance in our Orthodox chanting that we have, but also staying true to worshiping and glorifying God in that. So we just have about 5 more minutes here. Going to end with just our usual goodbye. I would like to tell everybody that at St. Mark's, we're having our Pre-Lenten Retreat from February 11th through the 13th. In this retreat, we have lots of Orthodox services, but we also have a keynote speaker. We'll be having Fr.Andrew Damick come and speak, talking about the gospel more, about how living the gospel, because many of us may know the gospel, or we think we do, but we really aren't living it. And so the topic is Arise, O God. We'll be focusing a lot about how can we live the gospel in this incredibly crazy modern age that we're living in. So on top of that, all the services and speak and talks, tickets are on our website at St. Mark Orthodox Church. If you can't type that in, just look up St. Mark's in Youngstown, Ohio. You'll see it. Click on it, Orthodox Church. You'll see the tickets on the top. Tickets are $15 a piece. Please come. We'll include food. That includes food and a lunch. And lots of beautiful singing and lots of beautiful talks that will lead us closer to Christ. So that's, again, February 11th through the 13th. All are welcome to come. Please sign up. And then on top of that, too, tonight we have Vespers at 4 p.m., which is the evening worship. And then Sunday morning, we have Matins at 9 a.m., followed by Divine Liturgy. And then on Wednesday nights, we have the beautiful service of the Paraklesis, which... that's one of my favorite services to chant.
Oh, absolutely. We took a break from chanting that because we've had many major feasts over the last, few weeks. And I couldn't stop smiling the whole time I was chanting that service. It was absolutely beautiful. So
we have the Paraklesis on Wednesday nights at 5 p.m. And then right after that, we have Bible study. We just started our course on St. Mark's Gospel. And you're probably asking, Father, why did you choose St. Mark? Well, that's because he's our patron. And so we're starting with St. Mark. We did the introduction, but we'll be starting with chapter 1. So please come. That's at 6 p.m. We have a little potluck. More than welcome to come. And you're more than welcome to be invited and to grow. And then on Thursday mornings, we have a Divine Liturgy at 10 a.m. So yeah, lots of heavy services. And this is just the life, though. This is the life of the Christian. Life doesn't just revolve around Sunday mornings for 45 minutes. It's a day in, day out struggle where we carry our cross and are trying to walk to our own Golgotha and Calvary so that way we may ascend to the heavenly. And so I'd like to thank Emily. I texted her this morning because George, decided to get sick. I mean, how selfish of him. Could you believe that? He decided to get sick. I mean, who does that? He's got sick. And so we were going to talk about religion of the apostles, the way of the apostles, the faith of the apostles. And so I had texted Emily. I said, help, I can't do this by myself. And so thanks be to God, she came here, and through the grace of God and through her prayers and through all of your beautiful ears that listening, we were able to talk about music and art in the Orthodox Church, but only skim the surface of it. I mean, if you truly want to see music and art of Orthodoxy, I would encourage you to look it up. And to come to St. Mark's or to come to an Orthodox church that's near you, look it up and hear the beauty of all the chanting and see the beauty of the iconography. Although, right, we talk about music and art, but we don't look at it as just a music and arts church history. We look at it as worship because that's what icons are. That's what art is. That's what music is. It's to transcend the earthly to the heavenly. And so I'd like to thank you, Emily.
Thank you for having me.
I know that we'll have you on again, and we'll talk about a few other things. But let's end with prayer. Again, thank you all. Remember that you're all welcome to come to St. Mark's. We're on. If you don't know our address, it's 3560 Logan Way in Youngstown. And I pray that I get to see you and that get to hear all the good that God has done for you. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. O Holy Apostle and Evangelist Mark, intercede with our merciful God to grant our souls forgiveness of sins. Amen. Thank you, and God bless you all.